Good day, everyone. It's February 4th. It's a Thursday in the year 2021. And my name is Ron Reagan. And we're going to have an episode of What's the Big Idea, a talk show for audacious visionaries today. But before we do that, and before I bring in my friend and brother, Carlton Turner, to join me, I want to take some time to give some homage and honor to a very special person. My grandmother, Gloria Hetty Lucy Mason Reagan, who transitioned this morning. She was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, to her parents, Sophronia Erica Nance Mason and William Jennings Mason. She was the granddaughter of Lucy Mason and Hetty George Nance, and she was 92 years old. I could say a lot of things about my grandmother, but the things that are coming to me right now to share are that she loved her family unconditionally. She was tough. She was uncompromising in a lot of ways. And so much of that was from her deep love and her understanding of the inherent dignity of every person, particularly her family. And she was not going to let you forget for a minute of your life that you were worthy of all that you needed and desired. My grandmother taught me about excellence. And I will remember I grew up many an afternoon after school going to her house. She and my grandfather would be there, and she made sure I got my homework done. She made sure that if I ever had a report card or anything with a grade on it that I brought into her house, that she was going to look at it and confirm that I got an A. And she was insistent that all of us, her children, her grandchildren, her nieces and nephews, did our best, whatever that was for us, and nothing less would she accept, nothing less. My grandmother taught me the importance of knowing your worth in a world, particularly in the South, growing up in the earlier part of the 20th century, the importance of knowing your worth and your value and your dignity in a world that denied that at every hand on all fronts, and finding solace and sacredness in family and in Black community as a respite from the racism, sexism, etc. in the world. She was a church-going woman. She believed strongly in her Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. She was an educator, both in and out of the home. She was a school teacher, but she taught so many people from her couch, from her sitting room. She has a closet full of hats, church hats, in beautifully gigantic boxes. She loved to dress up, to look nice. She taught me about aesthetics before I knew that was a word, taste. And she taught me to make sure that people treat me with respect. That's not a person you ever wanted to disrespect, my grandmother, no matter who you were. And I definitely carry her fiery energy in that regard with me. I could go on and on, But what I want to say is growing up with all four of my grandparents living for a good chunk of my life, that was such a blessing. And particularly spending time at my grandparents' house in Georgia during my childhood, almost every day of my life, really taught me the value of my elders, the stories that they tell, the lessons that they pass on, the questions that they ask, the ways they model, spoken and unspoken. It's one of the biggest areas of gratitude in my life, is to have lived in an intergenerational community and to have spent so many time learning from those who've come before me and who made my life possible in so many ways. So I give honor to my grandmother, and I send love to my family and to all of those who she touched, the many children she raised, knowing that there's going to be a lot of grieving, a lot of good memories, good times to recount, and that we will carry on her legacy. Yes, we will carry on her legacy. So I'm all puffy-eyed because I've been crying all morning, and I may very well burst into tears at some point during my conversation with Carlton. That's cool. I've got tissue ready. And I'm excited for the conversation that we're going to have as we talk about visions and dreams. Those are in such close conversation with the visions and dreams of those who have come before us. And as many a soul has now said, we are the ancestors' dreams that came before us. I don't know if they always knew what they were going to get, but part of their dreaming was making our lives possible. And so in that spirit, we honor those who have come before, we honor ourselves in this moment, and we honor those who are to come. So thank you all for listening to my little tribute for my grandmother. Again, Gloria, Hetty, Lucy, Mason, Reagan, all of her names. Say all of her names. And I'm going to bring in Brother Carlton right now to get this show started. Carlton.
What's happening? What's happening? Such a beautiful tribute. It was really, I'm honored to have had the opportunity to listen to you talk about your grandmother. It's a pleasure, and yes, something that I will cherish. And I want to send condolences to you and to your entire family as you all work through this transition.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. Yes. Well, welcome to What's the Big Idea, Carlton. I'm so happy to have you here. I usually don't introduce guests. I have guests introduce themselves. So what would you like to share about who you are and what you're bringing to the show today?
Oh, well. Let's see. That's a really great question. Let's see. How would I introduce myself? I think I would start by saying I am part of 8 generations of Mississippians, folks that have and been in this particular part of the state. I am the 5th generation that I can recognize, and there's 3 generations that are behind me. When you were talking about your grandmother and this intergenerational space, that is my everyday. So I live 2 minutes from where I was raised at my mother's house, where my mother lives and my brother lives, Maurice, who you know very well, and my sister lives next door with her husband and their 4 children. And I live another 3 minutes from my grandparents' house or my grandparents' place, where my mother's youngest brother now lives with his children, which is also in the backyard of our church. And they have a small farm there. My mother has a small farm at her place. I live next door to my aunt and her children. She has 4 children, and and amongst them there's 5 grandchildren. And so there's always a lot of children, of elders, and of my generation. And I have 46 first cousins. Last I counted, there may be more. I can't. Uncle kept producing, so I kind of lost track a little bit, but somewhere between 46 and 48. I think, in terms of just like introduction, I think my life is, I think about my father a lot, who I felt like didn't have any, he was a jack of all trades. Like he could do a little bit of everything. And my life is a lot like that. I find myself like in beautiful conversations like the one we're having today. This morning I was at the nursery picking out blueberry bushes and plum trees and corn to plant in the spring. And later today I'll be upstairs working on a construction project, installing some tiles. And who knows this evening what I'll be doing. Maybe editing a video or working on something with my children. So I feel like that's, I've been really privileged to have a life that is well-rounded and allows me the space to breathe between these different forms that I take, or these different perspectives that I work in. So that's what I would say.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. I'm so excited to hear about all the updates. So for everybody who is tuning in real time, or who might be tuning in and watching the recording, you'll see that there's a biography and a little bit more of a description of Carlton's work, particularly with the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. Did I get it right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sipp Culture for sure.
Culture. Whenever I try to say the whole thing, I'm like, am I getting all of the individual pieces correct? And the work they're doing there. And I'm sure we'll have some time to talk more about it, but please go check that out, learn more about their work. It's really amazing. And I'm so privileged to have been able to see this beautiful project that Carlton and the folks there in Utica, Mississippi are engaged with. So, all right. Carlton, as you know, this is a show where we lean into pleasure. So I'm curious, what in your environment, surroundings, what do you have on hand that is bringing you pleasure as we gather virtually here today?
What did I have? I had something that I brought in. So what brings me pleasure, and this is country boy stuff. So I like to look through these catalogs, like these like plant catalogs. I used to like to look through clothing catalogs back when I was younger and dreamed of being a model. But these days, it's dreaming of like the things that we can grow and produce in our community. So I think a lot about food, and I get turned on by like agricultural supply catalogs.
Yes.
So I'm looking for like some forklift attachments to put on the end of my front end loader, and that kind of stuff. I get pleasure from it. I know that I'm not sure that anyway, it's my pleasure. So I'll hold it.
That's right.
Yeah.
No explanation needed.
I like working with my hands, and I think that so much of our work is in the head, and a lot of it is in the heart. But so much of it is this intellectual space that we're asked to be in, to talk about and to kind of philosophize about the work that we do and why it's important, and how we can, think more about it and do all that stuff. And that's fine. I think I did that like very in depth for my years at Alternate Roots. And I still do a lot, but coming back to my home community and like engaging in this work that is at its core about building. It's about building something new, and this idea of putting your hands on something and transforming it into something that can be used again, or that can be used and more relevant to our community. So that's really what I get into, and that's what really excites me these days.
Wonderful. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yes, no one's yucking your yums for your pleasure. Get your forklift, brother. Get your forklift. All right. For my pleasure show and tell, I think this will just be like a thing for me. A mug, usually a pleasing ceramic object with coffee in it that I made, or at least that I brewed.
I love coffee.
My freshest batch of cold brew. It's tasting very good.
What is cold brew? Help me out. I don't really know what that means.
Okay. Well, based on my understanding and now my practice, it's one of my pandemic skill sets that I've picked up. It's the process of, instead of grinding beans and then pouring hot water over them and filtering that liquid into a cup for coffee. Instead of doing that, you grind up a bunch of beans and then you put them in room temperature water and you sit it on the counter. This is what I do for 2 days, and you just let it steep in room temperature cold water. And so in theory, it creates a less acidic flavor for the coffee and a bit of a smoother. So I'm into it. It's cold. It's really room temperature brew as opposed to cold.
You drink it warm.
So you can do it either way. I will, when the weather is warmer, I'll use it and make iced coffee. I also take the cold brew and make ice cubes from it. And then I have, because the ice in the coffee, it waters it down. It's not good. I don't like that. So I have cold brew ice cubes for my cold brew. But on a day like today where the weather is warming, but not super warm in my house, I just pour it out into a pot, heat it up on the stove, and there we go.
My grandmother used to make sun tea. And yes, she had this big gallon jar that she would sit in the window in her kitchen, and it would just brew tea during the day. And that was the best tea I've ever had in my life. And I don't know why I don't do sun tea right now, but that's maybe something I'll take up this summer.
Same vibes, pretty much. I guess there is a version of this where you take whole bean coffee and you put it in the sun, and then it takes a lot longer apparently, but you can do whole bean. That's if you're patient, I guess. But yeah, I mean, again, sort of like taking it back to older methods and technologies of producing what we need. So I'm really feeling the cold brew life. And I also have this pump from the Crew of Muses that I was gifted. And I love this as a little totem for my grandmother today because she loved her pumps. I don't feel like glitter was her thing so much. She probably has a glittery hat, but this is a little emblem in remembrance of her today that's sitting on my desk right here.
Beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are. Oh yeah. Do you have any intentions for our time together today, good sir?
I just want to enjoy the conversation with you. It's rarely that we get a chance to just talk outside of when we're face to face. It's usually we're talking about some business or something that we're doing together. But my intention is just to enjoy this time with you.
Wonderful. That's my intention as well. Yeah. So here we are. All right. Well, before we get into the dream space, for those who have tuned in before, y'all will know this. For those who are new to the show, this is called the venting session, where Carlton and I will each get 2 minutes to release whatever we need to release and get off our chests so that we can dive into the dreaming world together. Speaking of technology, this feels like an important one to free up ourselves to do the dreaming and visioning work, to call that in. So the way it works is I'll set a timer. Carlton will go first. He'll have 2 minutes to get whatever he needs to get off of his chest. I will then lead us through 3 breaths to just continue to discharge that energy. Then I'll go 2 minutes for me, 3 breaths to close it out, and then we'll move into the dreaming space. All right. So Carlton, are you ready to go?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to start the timer when you tell me to start it.
Cool. Let's go.
Go.
I think the things that I'm venting about these days are one is a personal problem, and it's my addiction to social media. And I truly think that it's the bane of all of our existence, and is it has cheapened our interactions and our relationships, and taken all of the nuance out of conversations and building, and it's hard to have a real conversation in that space, and yet it colors so much of our lives. It's a part of so much of what we do. We rely on it so much, and I'm trying to figure out ways to honor myself, and step away from that medium more and more. And I think I just have to find more ways to do that. So that's one. I think the other thing is that I've been venting about lately is we have been working here at Sipp Culture trying to figure out ways to honor the people that we work with, and making sure that they're paid a living wage, making sure that we provide health care and health benefits, and making sure that we make the day-to-day life as simple as possible. And there's so many barriers to helping to make quality workspaces that are that are put in our space. Regulations, and you got to do this registration, you got to do this form, you got to do this thing, and it's so ridiculous that for the average person, if you don't have connections to CPAs and legal experts, and then you end up creating something that doesn't work right. And so that has been a lot of frustration, trying to get insurance for our workers, trying to get all those things. And so that's I'll throw that out there as a space that we need to do a lot of work in.
Word. All right. Let's exhale together and release some of that. So take a moment to get settled. Breathing in and releasing that. Second, inhaling, cleansing breath, and releasing some more. And a third, deep breath. And exhale. All right.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna start my timer. Thank you, sir. Let's see what happens. Okay. Well, honoring our elders is really on my mind today, and or the ways that we don't do that culturally and collectively. What's coming up? What's coming up is I'm recalling some of the conversations earlier in the pandemic where folks were just like, well, it's just like old people and sick people who are going to die. That's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. They are not, implying, right, that these people who are beloved in their communities, who have relationships, who exist, they don't even need to do anything. They just, people who exist, don't deserve to live, don't deserve to be cared for, don't deserve to be honored with our collective acknowledgement and stewardship of their well-being. And that's so terrible. And I am concerned about how did we get there? What happened? What happened such that we don't believe our elders or those among us who have chronic illness or who have disabilities are not worthy of care, are not worthy of deep collective consideration. And I have an analysis around capitalism, and if we're not productive beings, then we don't belong in this society, which only values us to the extent that we can work for a marketplace of labor. But there's something about the feeling that feels missing from that. All right. Okay. So inhaling and releasing. Inhaling and releasing. Inhaling and releasing. All right.
My wife brought me my glasses, so I'm good to go now.
Thank you, Brandi. All right. Well, Carlton, before we jump straight into the dreaming space, I wonder if you just want to give a little bit for people who haven't yet heard about Sipp Culture, just a little thumbnail about what it is y'all do.
Yeah. Sipp Culture is an initiative that my wife and I created in my home community, the community that my family has been in for 8 generations, Utica, Mississippi, small town, about 900 people in the town center, about 4,500 people in the zip code. And the work that we're doing, the simplified version of it is that we work in food and story. We work in creating space for comprehensive community cultural development, using food as the foundation and story as the architecture. So we're working. We have an artist residency program. We have 3 physical spaces. We have an artist residency house, an office, which I am in right now. It is a 1920s house that we've been renovating into an artist live workspace. It's on 1.5 acres of land, and we have 500 square feet of raised bed gardens here, in which we grow fresh vegetables for this space. We're about to put in a 1,600 square foot climate controlled greenhouse in the backyard with an outdoor classroom. We have a 17 acres of green space that we're turning into a community farm. We do artists, we commission artists, we grant to artists, and we work with growers and agriculturalists, and we train young farmers, and we grow food and help to feed the community.
Word. All right. So I know that Sipp Culture is a product of a lot of visioning and dreaming on your part and on the part of your family and your community. But zooming out from that for a second as a specific look, because I don't want to point you directly toward that if there's somewhere else you might want to go for the more open-ended question, which is, as you sit here today, Carlton, what are you dreaming and visioning about for our collective future? What's on your heart, your mind, and your spirit?
Wow. What am I dreaming about these days? Yeah, a lot of my headspace and visioning is about how do we redefine rural culture? How do we, I think a lot about time. Dreaming about time and how time is the major factor in change. That change inevitably over time, and our ability we have the ability to shape how time manifests things. And thinking a lot about time and dreaming about long range ideas, ideas that take 20 years to begin to surface or manifest, thinking about generational relationships and the way that generations, I am doing the work that I'm doing today because of work that my parents did 40 years ago, and because of the work that my grandparents did 60 and 70 years ago, and that these concentric circles of generational relationships, if shaped, if directed, if pointed in a particular, focused in a particular way, which I consider to be culture, like really defining the culture that we want to live, because to me, culture transcends time. If the culture is a rich culture of values and of ways of being that are connected deeply to place, connected deeply to other people, then that culture helps us to manifest the type of lives the life that we want to live. So I think a lot about cultural production. I think a lot about intergenerational relationships. And so I think about the work that we're doing here, and the dream is that the work that we're doing today is literally planting seeds. Like, we're just planting seeds for the first decade of this work. It's not, the harvest. I'm dreaming about the harvest. That's the dream about the harvest.
Yes. Love it. And I'm looking down because I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna, for the first time ever on What's the Big Idea, my computer is not plugged in and my charger is in the other room. So I'm gonna go get my charger so that this can keep going. And we'll be right back, everybody. One minute. You can keep talking if you want, but I'm
just going to talk to the audience and talk to the world. And, and say that, when I first met Ron, I'll tell a story about when I first met Ron. When I first met Ron, it was in California. I'm pretty sure it was in San Francisco. And we were at this conference, and it was a Grant Makers in the Arts conference. And it's always been a very dry conference. But this particular one, they were having a talent show. And I think Moy Ing, who worked at Hewlett, was in the talent show, and she's a beautiful singer, and she was performing, and I think I read some poetry or something. And then here comes this thin afro that came to the stage and belted out, and this voice that came from the body did not look like the body at all, didn't resemble. And I was like, my God, what is that? And I was just so stunned at this voice, this angelic voice that came from Ron. And I was like, got to meet that brother. So I walked up and we talked, and we began building a relationship, and we've been friends ever since.
That's so good. I'm so glad that's what you chose to do at that time. The other version of the other facet of this story that's really funny, not to overly belabor, philanthropy as a topic of conversation here, but at that conference, wherever it was, I don't remember, but yeah, it was my first conference, Grant Makers in the Arts. Moy Ing was my boss at the Hewlett Foundation at the time, and required me to perform in the talent show that she coordinated, because she was planning the talent show. And I know she probably voluntold you to do it as well, Carlton.
Yes.
But what was funny about that conference is that there were, I think, 4 Black men at that conference of hundreds of people. It was me, Carlton, Wesley, who worked at NPN. Wasn't that his name?
Wesley Montgomery. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there was another guy who worked at the Wallace Foundation, whose name I can't remember. Older gentleman. So basically, people didn't know who was whom, because, oh my gosh, Black people at Grant Makers in the Arts, Black men at Grant Makers in the Arts. Okay. So everybody thought I was Carlton. So I'm walking around this conference and people are like, are you Carlton? Now, mind you, I have on a name tag. Come on, people. Come on, white people. Do better, right? I have on a name tag. It says Ron very largely so that you can meet me as I am asking you to meet me. But no, I was Carlton to everyone. Everybody was looking for Carlton. Are you Carlton? Are you Carlton?
That's the only reason.
Who is Carlton? He must be Black. That's what I knew.
Only reason,
and then we finally met.
The only reason they knew my name is because I was there the year before.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like the only black person they had met. They were like, "Oh, you must be Carlton." Nah.
So I was like, we've got to be friends, me and this person. So we finally made that meeting, and so it was,
Yeah.
But all right, that was a little background story for everybody. So I really, Carlton, you're one of my favorite thinkers, and you always have like something you're musing about that makes me go, oh yes, I haven't thought about it that way before. So you talked about this like place, people, culture as sort of this triangle as part of what I'm hearing. And of this idea, this practice of shaping change, right? Shaping how we want time to unfold, or how we want time to affect things. So what is the culture that you all are seeking to create? What are the cultural seeds that you feel you're planting or nurturing at this time? Where are you wanting things to go?
So, yeah, that's a very hard question, and the reason why I think that it's a hard question is because it's not for me to decide where it goes.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
I think the work that we have to do, I think the work that we have to do in this moment is about preparing the community and the space, preparing the place and the culture to be able to decide that.
Yes.
See, right now we're lacking the facilities, the capacity as a community to collectively make decisions about the culture that we want to be a part of, that we want to represent, want to leave as part of the legacy. And so what we've recognized in our work at Sipp Culture is that the social fabric is frayed, if not in many places torn, ripped to shreds in our community. And it is that social space that gives the ability for our community to one, know each other in more than just the social media type of knowing, and to be able to build things and have conversations that are nuanced enough to actually get to problem solving. So when we think about challenges in our community, every community has challenges. I think we'll always have some challenge that we're facing. The strength of a community, this idea of resilience, is built on our ability to meet whatever that challenge is and be able to work through it and come out on the other side. And our community, all of those social structures that have existed before, not all of them were perfect, but they existed. And they were places where community was able to build and relate to each other and learn about each other and be in relationship to each other outside of faith-based spaces, has been frayed. And so I feel like the work that we're doing right now, this seed planting, is about seeding seeding the spaces for social fabric to regrow and to requilt those spaces back, not the same spaces. And I think that that's what we want to make sure that people understand, that this is not a operation of nostalgia. We're not trying to rebuild some idea that existed that we want to get back to. We want to understand, how do we utilize these social spaces, these social mechanisms to help the community learn intimately about its ability to work together, to strategize together, and to make decisions that are about building a brighter future, a better future for the entire community. And it really sits at the seat of health and wellness. So food for us is a big part of that. It's like making sure that we have more access, ownership, and control over our own food systems. And that's really important. And it's not an abstract idea, because our community has already done that. That's something that the community has already achieved. And one of the things I think you and I talked about when you were here is that, Mississippi is often talked about as being at the bottom of the best list and at the top of the worst list. And we're stuck in a time that is out of sync with the contemporary or modern space. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think it's a simplified response, but I also think about the idea that if Mississippi is in a space that is, if 50 years ago, most rural communities around the country were providing their own food, and they're no longer doing that, but Mississippi is 40 years behind the time, then actually we're closer to having to manifesting an idea of a practice of sustainability than most are. And I think that that's where the promise for me of Mississippi is, and the promise of the work that we're doing in these rural communities.
Yes. Yes. I hear you. And part of what I'm hearing is that I love that. I love the metaphor that is the real thing that you're working in, which is to say that you are literally planting seeds and you're figuratively planting seeds, right? Yeah. You're literally creating the conditions for food to grow, right? You got the greenhouse, you got the garden boxes, you're re-socializing these skills of how to cultivate and to attend to the growth of what will nourish this community in terms of food. And you are also creating the conditions on a social scale or in the social realm to grow in the seeds, right, that you're talking about, that the community is going to sow around what is the culture that we want to live into as we move forward. It's just really beautiful. And it is continually appealing to me how all of this fits together.
Yeah. You know, and when you're talking about your grandmother, you know, my grandparents, my grandmother specifically, you know, they taught me, you know, this is stuff that I learned on the farm at grandma's house. You know, growing up where, you know, my grandmother literally, I would walk down, I would go to her house early in the morning. This is like 5 and 6 years old. And we would get dropped off there, me and my brother, and my parents would go to work in the neighboring community. And I would walk down into, you know, the next door lot with my grandfather. He would milk the cow, and he'd pick up some eggs, you know, from the chickens. And, you know, we walk back up to the house, and he'd turn that bucket of milk to my grandmother. She would sit there, she would take the milk, and she would transform that milk, that raw milk, that sweet milk, into cream for the coffee, into butter for the biscuits, into, you know, buttermilk for the cornbread in the afternoon. The eggs she would cook. My grandfather, you know, had hogs, and he had his own smokehouse, so we would eat smoked ham, and it was just, everything was right there. It wasn't, you know, the grocery store didn't play a meaningful role in our lives. And now there's no eating without, you know, the grocery store has inserted itself into everything that we ingest. And that's not our history, and it doesn't have to be our future. And I don't know that it can be our future. And so those are the things that we're trying to wrestle with, and we're trying to engage the community in a conversation that is adding nuance to what are our food challenges and what are the solutions, and to not just lean into the idea that getting a grocery store back into our community is going to solve our problems.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. I really appreciate you ensuring that the you is pluralized as I'm asking you these questions, right? That it's not just about you, Carlton, having a specific vision or dream. It's about creating the conditions for the community to do that work together. And that's the work of Sipp Culture. That's your work.
That's the work. Yeah, that's the work. And for me, it's, you know, what I have is a set of skills, and those skills can be, you know, lent to help in many different ways. Facilitation, literally building spaces, and you know, development, and, you know, training, or whatever I need to do. But there's also, you know, at least 100 other people in the community that have a set of skills that we can put to use to this collective work as well. So it's not me. It doesn't work if it's just me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in that regard, I'm really curious. So what I'm hearing you describe, you tell me if this resonates for you, is like a practice, a praxis of collective dreaming, collective visioning, collective culture making, right? That is part of what Sipp Culture is doing. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what does that practice look like of creating space for folks to come together and dream together or vision together? What does it look like to create those conditions that you mentioned for these social cultural seeds to grow in the future? How do you do it? How do you bring people together? What's the practice?
Yeah. I'll start here. When we first started, putting kind of some meat on the bones of this Sipp culture idea, one of my go-to phrases was that we're building a place for the community to bring their dreams. And this idea of dreaming, that people have dreams. Like, we ain't the only one with dreams. I'm not the only one with a dream. Folks got them, and folks don't have spaces to manifest them. And so we were really interested in understanding, what does that look like. So I think what that practice looks like is challenging ourselves around issues of access and transparency, language, and acknowledging where barriers exist and trying to dismantle them. I know that I've been indoctrinated by philanthropy in the world of nonprofit jargon, and I often find myself talking about the work in ways that the community is like, what is he talking about? And so engaging with folks that can hold me accountable to speaking the language of the community that I'm in and that I'm a part of. The one that kind of has trained me to think in particular ways. So it's been, for me, decolonizing my language, decolonizing my own, I guess, I've been on the road for the last 15 years, traveling, being at conferences and being in communities that were not my own, building valuable relationships, but that also in many ways has created this separation between me and my home community. Even starting in my very home, like, after being on the road for 15 years, having a wife and 3 children, coming back home meant that I had to go through a process of like understanding what it means to be in this space as a all day, every day reality, and how to reintegrate back into a family space. It's not the same thing as traveling from airport to hotel to conference room, back to hotel, back to airport, and out into another city on a daily basis. It is about relationships. And so for me, that practice is about relationships, checking in, on folks, engaging with people, not being afraid to talk to people that you wouldn't normally talk to, or, that you don't necessarily know, and introducing yourself and being, the first big lesson for me was like, everything that I've done out there that I may have a reputation for, or that I may have accolades or whatever for, my community doesn't really know about that, and neither do they care. So in that respect, that stuff isn't valuable. What's valuable is the way that I show up for them, the way that I show up in this space, in this moment, and how I build on, I think, the relationships that have existed before me, that I stand on. Those with my mother and my grandparents, my grandfather. So that's what the practice looks like. It's like, humble and opening the possibility for anything to transpire, and not being locked into a way that I think things should go, or the way that I'm used to doing them, because I come from this professionalized setting of nonprofit, organizational development. And at the same time, recognizing that some of those pieces need to be in place in order for us to provide for the community the way that we need to, or the way that they're asking us to show up.
Yeah.
So it's that balancing act that I think the practice is right now. The way that we gathering people is difficult. It's been really hard this last year because we have not been able to gather in the traditional ways that we were. In years 1 and 2 of our operation, we spent a lot of time visiting churches and going to community gatherings and hosting events in which we invited people to our space and that ranged from small gatherings of 5 to 10 people to gatherings of 300 people and those were all ways and that we were engaging our community and like doing something together. And COVID has made that really difficult. And we've seen it show up in the way that our community is struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was such a generous answer. And I really appreciate your reflections of the really day-to-day relational practice of doing the work that you're talking about doing. I think that, yeah, I mean, like in the space that we met, that's not the value. That's not the value. The value is, did you write a fancy report with a lot of numbers in it? And do you have a strong rhetorical argument by which to base the fact that you have value to have this conversation with me? Because otherwise, why am I talking to you? What do you know? And I mean, I feel like that was part of why I felt at home when I met you, because we both knew that that actually wasn't what was really going on. That's not actually how work gets done. And also, coming from rural places where there is a different sensibility. I would say, in my experience, there was, when I'd come back, now I haven't moved back home since leaving as an adult, but, there's this sense when I have come back home to Perry, Georgia, for those of you who don't know where I'm from, that there's this like, oh, that stuff you do out there in the world, like, it's cool. Like, it must be good, but I don't know what it is. Like, very few people in my family could tell anybody, like, with any degree of certainty what I do. Like, people don't know. They're like, he went out and got that fancy education, and I think he's doing well out there. He's making money. Okay, that's good. He's taking care of himself. That's cool. But at the end of the day, if I can't translate that and make it a value, it's not valuable. If I can't convert that into something that's useful in my relationships. And I think, though I don't live at home right now, I do, before COVID, go home a lot. And one of the things that's always felt most important to me as an artist is like, can my family engage with my work? They don't have to like it. They don't even have to necessarily understand it, but it's important for me that they feel welcome into it as observers, just like anybody else. Right? So I love the fact that my mom watches this talk show. I love it. It's great. My granddad is apparently tuning in right now, which is amazing. Right. And that I can have conversations with people in my family and in my home community about what I do, that they feel welcome into engaging with my work as they will. And they don't feel like it's not accessible to them or it's like over their heads or anything like that. So there's an ongoing dialogue and there's an ongoing responsibility I feel I have to, if I'm coming from this place, from this family, from this cultural experience, and of course that's informing everything that I do, like at minimum, I would hope that my work could have some relevancy, at least a good conversation around it with my people. So, yeah, I feel like you articulating that now and talking about your journey just underscores the importance of that, regardless of what our relationships are physically or career-wise to our home communities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Woo. Okay. Carlton, I'm curious if you're reading or like what's exciting to you in addition to agricultural magazines. Is anything out there in the world giving you inspiration, TV shows, anything? What's inspiring you these days? What's helping you dream and vision?
Oh wow! I think the thing that keeps me going is my 4 year old. He
Awesome.
he keeps me dreaming and visioning. Um, he is he's a ball of energy. He's a lot like I was at his age. Um, and I think he's going to be a lot bigger than I am. He's going to be like 6'3", 6'4". But he is very smart, has a
Yeah.
great sense of humor, and he catches me off guard often, like with his language and how he pays attention to um, things when you think he's like not even like in the room, and he's like, he may be off on his little iPad screen or whatever, and you say something and he'll answer you with a question with such clarity, and you're like, I didn't even know you were sitting there, like, but that's the kind of he keeps me going. And
Yes.
I wonder what this world how this world will value him, right?
Mm.
And kind of, I watch my fair amount of news, and I read a fair amount of articles, and I read, books, and I, talk to people. I'm constantly in conversations, and my mind is, I'm always thinking about 10 or 15 different things. Like that's just the way that I'm wired. And I'm always like trying to play things out to see in my mind, like what is the logical conclusion to that line of thought, to that particular idea. And the United States troubles me. Like, like this space and the values that we've as a country have like leaned into for too long are death cult values. They're like, the
Absolutely.
only logical conclusion is destruction.
Right. Right.
And that, like, so I wonder, like, for my little people, like what are the skills that they need to be putting into their bodies, into their muscle memory, that will help them navigate. Like, I think about in Mississippi, people say, well, Mississippi, the folks will put their head down and, scoot off the curb or whatever when white folks walking down. That was a survival mechanism. That wasn't that folks thought they were less than.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so the clarity around that is understanding that the muscle memory that had to be taught as a child to young black
Mm-hmm.
men and black girls was to provide their body safety and to
Yes.
ensure that they grew up to be able to make decisions on their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I wonder about what are the muscle memories that we need to be teaching now to our children, not
Mm.
necessarily to like um, save them from white supremacy, because that may be a futile direction. But what are the muscle memories that they need for life? And I think about the things that my grandparents had in that muscle memory, that were about cultivating of land, that were about this ritual relationship between the offerings that they were able to give to the land and the offerings that
Mm-hmm.
they were able to give back to them.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that cycle, that give and take, that dialogue between the earth, was the most valuable thing that they had, and it's the most valuable thing that
Mm.
they were able to give to me. And I think that there's value in me helping to give that to the next generation.
Ashe. Yes. Thank you. That's beautiful. I will be thinking about that. What are the muscle memories that we need to be teaching the younger generations, and why? For what? To your point, it's not about, surviving white supremacy,
Yeah.
but what else? What else? See, there you go. That's what Carlton does. Gives me a seed and says, "Here you go, Ron. What will you do with that?"
Sure,
What'd you say?
and seed will come back. You'll bring it back to me at some point. You'll be like, you remember we was talking about such and such, and this is what I've been thinking about.
Yes, probably. Well, there's so much to think about. I always take notes during these conversations. So I've got
Yeah.
like a note sheet here. So Thank you, Carlton. This has been so wonderful. And thank you again. I texted Carlton earlier. I was like, Carlton, my grandmother just passed. I think I still want to do the show. How do you feel about that? And he was like, whatever space you need, I'll hold it for you. So thank you for coming on in and going with the flow of time and change that we
Yeah.
are all in. It's so good to be here with you virtually. For those who would like to share some monetary expressions of gratitude, you can learn more about and donate to Sipp Culture using the link here on the screen. That's sippculture.com/donate, sip with 2 P's, SIPP culture.com/donate. Please go check out their work. It's really phenomenal. And when it's safe again, Utica is a beautiful city, and Sipp Culture is a beautiful space to visit. So I hope folks will check it out. Next week, and the link to donate is in the notes of the show, the description on YouTube. So feel free to click away. The next show will be February 18th with Kim Pevia, another person in our Alternate Roots family. Check out Alternate Roots, alternateroots.org, if you don't know about that organization and the amazing work that Southern artists and activists are doing in their communities. And I'm so grateful to everyone who has continued to tune into the show. We're going to keep it moving through April 1st. And I have a feeling that there will be a second season come fall. So everybody keep a lookout for that, and continue to be well. Take care of your elders, honor them, thank them for making your life possible. And we'll be moving on down the road. Peace and love to everybody. Thank you, Carlton.
Yes, thank you. An honor to Miss Gloria.
Ashe.